special agenda. Before we get started, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Mayor Plummer, would you please lead us? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, if you're joining us on Zoom or on the phone, public participation procedures are online. They're also on the agenda. We have printed agendas there in the back. Are we going to do roll call? I'm looking at County Council. I know it's a presentation only. Do we need to do roll call?
Right. Is everybody from both bodies here? You don't have to do roll call.
Okay.
I know the city of Sonora, though, generally does roll call, right?
City of Sonora, looks like you have all accounted for. Yes, and Ann, okay. Okay. Well, Ann will be here when she's here. I know the county, we are ready to rock and roll. Let's see here. Yes. For the public, we should do introductions. Individual?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Okay, so we'll do quick introductions. I'm gonna hand this down we'll just start there and then we'll work our way around. Just do it quick.
Suzanne Cruz, City Council.
Andy Merrill, Sonora City Council.
Ryan Campbell, District 2 Supervisor.
Jaron Brandon, District 5 Supervisor.
Mark Plummer, current mayor of Sonora.
Good afternoon, David Goldenberg, Supervisor for District 1.
Matt Hawkins, Sonora City Council and former mayor now.
Kathleen Haff, Supervisor for District 4.
And Anaya Kirk, District 3 Supervisor. Okay, with that being said, we're going to move on to our appointment for today. So, Clerk of the Board, would you please read the presentation for 3 o'clock?
Presentation by the Sierra Business Council regarding implementation of Phase 2 of the Community Economic Resilience Fund, CERF program.
Okay, I'll take it away. My name is Mel Frank. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Today we're here for a joint meeting between the City of Sonora's Council and the Tuolumne County Board of Supervisors to hear a presentation on a new program that is being initiated by the state of California. The presentation will be given from Sierra Business Council, and it's in regards to the implementation of Phase 2 of the Community Economic Resiliency Fund program, or what's being referred to as CERF. So with that, I will turn over to Steve Frisch, who will be giving you the presentation on the CERF program.
Great. Thank you, Maureen, and thank you to the members of the Board of Supervisors and the Sonora City Council for this invitation. We really appreciate the opportunity for this informational discussion. So a couple of quick announcements before we get started. One of them is my mistake. I should have reviewed the documents better. This is Phase 1 of the CERF program. So when we get into the presentation, you will see that this program is intended to be deployed in 2 phases. The first phase is a planning phase, and the second phase is an implementation phase where infrastructure funding will be tied to Phase 2 implementation. And then the second announcement in advance of the presentation, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, the Economic Development Department, and Office of Planning and Research had intended to do announcements of the awardees for all 13 regions of the state by today. That did not occur. So I just wanted to let you know that no official announcement award has been made yet. And we are giving this presentation today without 100% firm knowledge that we are going to be the implementers. Although I can honestly say there was not another application from this region, so it would be unlikely that somebody else would work on the program. But there is no official award announcement yet, and we're not anticipating one until probably the last week of the month. So with that said, thank you so much for being here today, members of the board and city council and the public. It's a really exciting opportunity to talk about a program to look at long-term economic development and what some of the opportunities in the region might be. And okay, it's supposed to be simple.
Yes, so that was our presentation.
Oh, I see. Okay, great.
There you go.
Thanks. Sometimes we're technology deficient here. So also, I did want to let you guys know that there are two members of Sierra Business Council staff who are attending by Zoom. Kristen York, who is Sierra Business Council's vice president and oversees all of our program implementation, and Erica Harvey, who is a Sierra Business Council program manager and recently worked on several statewide or Sierra-wide kind of assessments for both climate and economic development within the region. So we have other staff members here as well. So I'm going to give you a brief outline of the Community Economic Resilience Fund and what it is intended to do. Talk a little bit about the stakeholders in the process, a little bit about program goals, objectives, and what we went through for the application process. Some feedback on partnership, data collection. I think one of the things that's really important in this process is that it be aligned with all of the great work you guys are already doing in the region. We're aware of the point that there are a number of other planning and development initiatives going on at the same time, so we want to make sure that these things are symbiotic and support each other rather than conflicting in their objectives, right? And then talk a little bit about what other resources might be available to you in order to learn more about the program and what's possible within it. So a little bit about Sierra Business Council. We're a regional 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1994, based around the idea of kind of moving forward the long-term economic development of the Sierra Nevada region. We look at that through like three lenses. One is creating strong communities with economic opportunity. The second is looking at financial prosperity for the residents of the region. And the third is stewarding our resources and maintaining kind of the sense of place in the Sierra Nevada that has made it a special place for everyone that lives here for multiple generations. So SBC does program work up and down the Sierra Nevada region. We have done a lot of program work in this region, in this area of the Sierra Nevada in the past. Some of you may be familiar with us for our work on the local government partnership with Pacific Gas and Electric to expand energy efficiency and opportunities for building retrofits for small and medium-sized businesses, which we've worked on for several years. We also recently did a Sierra Nevada-wide climate vulnerability assessment, which covers this region of the Sierra Nevada as well. And you're going to see a little bit of data from that in this presentation today. And we are also currently working on a couple of projects that overlap in the region, including a project with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research to look at biomass aggregation within the region and trying to create a market for biomass utilization. So that market could include things like liquid fuels, biomass to electrical energy, value-added wood products. So we are one of 5 pilot districts in the state that OPR funded to look at long-term biomass utilization as kind of an economic opportunity strategy. So we are implementing that program with OPR. And we are also working on a statewide workforce education and training program called the Good Jobs Challenge, which is looking at expanding workforce education and training opportunities for people working in the wood products industry. So everything from thinning, logging operations, prescribed fire, biomass utilization, collection and aggregation, the logistics, heavy equipment operating, the whole supply chain around what are the workforce opportunities coming out of biomass. So that is another project we're working on in the region. So we have kind of a long history working up and down the Sierra Nevada, but it's really exciting for us to be taking a deeper dive in the Central Sierra region. Although we do work all over the region. Our office is based in Truckee. Most of our staff is based in Truckee. However, for the purposes of this program, should we get it, we would base staff in the community to implement the program for roughly the next 3 years. So how we work, a lot of our work is focused on implementing on-the-ground projects that will create economic opportunity and steward the environment and build community kind of cohesion and community support. So we really do look at these things through that lens of achieving those 3 goals at the same time. And then our role in the SURF, as I said, it is not secured yet, so we're not making any announcement today, but we did apply to be both the fiscal sponsor and the regional convener for the SURF program, which I'll get into right now. So what is SURF? The Community Economic Resilience Fund is a one-time use of state general funds that will distribute $600 million to regions across California to support inclusive and low-carbon economic development. I want to be really clear here that this is not like instead of any other economic development strategy. It's in addition to other economic development strategies that might be being deployed within the region. So that is particularly important because we're working very closely with the Central Sierra Economic Development District, of which both of your jurisdictions are members of, to make sure that the strategies that we develop, should we get the SURF grant as part of SURF, are consistent with the economic development strategies that are being developed regionally across this 7-county region. We'll get into the region in just a minute. So the source of funding for SURF originally was the American Rescue Plan. So this is an idea that had been percolating at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development and at EDD for many years, looking at the point that California has not actually had an economic development strategy since about 2001. Many of you old timers will remember that during the dot-com bust and the kind of budget deficits that we had in the early 2000s, the California Department of Business, Housing, and Transportation was eliminated, split into several different parts, and the business part never quite came back. Housing and transportation stayed, but business never quite came back. So, so as part of this ongoing effort to kind of reinsert long-term business development in state strategies, GoBiz was created about 5 years ago. And one of the first things they started thinking about was, how do we actually look at long-term planning in California for economic development? And is this a state that could actually benefit from a single economic development plan? And I think there was a recognition that the reality is California is not one economy. Like California with 40 million residents, 3 major ports, many industries that are deep in one region but not present in others. For example, logistics and transportation in Southern California because of the ports, entertainment because of Hollywood, technology because of Silicon Valley, that a single economic strategy was not going to work across the state of California. And we needed to start looking at what are the regional strategies across the state in order to lift up economic opportunity and kind of create higher paying jobs across the state. So they had already been thinking about this when COVID hit. And then with the impact of COVID and with the deployment of American Rescue Plan funding, the question was, isn't this the time for us to step back, take another look at what's the long-term strategy, and actually let the regions do that themselves? Do it ground up rather than top down from the state. So that was kind of the origin of the SURF program. Now, since the program was conceived, the funding source changed because of the timelines attached to American Rescue Plan funding and the constraints on federal funding. So they looked at ARP funding, which I'm sure many of your jurisdictions have, and looked at what the requirements were for the deployment of those funds and said, you know, this is probably not an ARP project. let's use the ARP funding for infrastructure and then use state general funds for this economic planning process. So this is actually a state general fund plan funded program. So it doesn't have the same constraints on it that federal funding has had, which I think is a really good thing. So the program objectives and deployment. So the objectives of the program as stated by the request for proposals were to promote equitable and sustainable economic development. So by equitable and sustainable, they were looking at this issue of identifying industry clusters within the regions that had a real opportunity of growth over time so that they were investing in economic activities that would actually create more higher wage jobs. And by equitable, they're really looking at this issue of how do we take people from essentially lower wage employment to higher wage employment, what are known as high road jobs, in order to invest in the sectors that will create more high road jobs. And then how do we look at the communities that have traditionally been left behind and make sure that they have equal and fair access to those kinds of employment later on in the process as the funds are deployed. So there's some very specific kind of objectives here, which are industry cluster based, high wage job based, and then distributing the benefit across areas of the community that traditionally have not received as much benefit. So, and then there was also direction in the request for proposals to look at state and federal funding opportunities in other areas and align these strategies with the ability to leverage other state and federal funds. So this is particularly important because there have been at least 2 major federal funding initiatives that are creating tremendous opportunity for infrastructure investments in California. So the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed last February and the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed last August, the 2 of them combined are likely to lead to roughly $80 billion of additional investment in infrastructure in California if the standard federal funding formulas were to hold. So the state is really interested in, at the local level, how can we identify infrastructure investments that SURF could invest in and then would leverage additional federal funding in order to get that infrastructure in place on the ground, right? And those are only 2 examples of potentials for leverage. There's also potential for leverage, for example, with the state's Transportation Improvement Program funding, with the state's Climate Adaptation and Mitigation funding, with state forest management funding, and with other economic development funding that is in other areas of the state budget. So think about this as an opportunity to put together a strategy that creates leverage for long-term investment. And then finally, that goal that I mentioned previously, support inclusive economic planning that prioritize equity, job quality, and sustainability. I described those already, but this inclusive part is really important. So the request for proposals requires that we describe a robust public participation plan, which we did, and the applicants will be expected to do public meetings, publicly noticed, open to everyone, and also to make all of the documentation and information public throughout the process, and then to take public comment on the recommendations on a regular basis. Although there is one really important thing to note in that process as well. This does not actually commit any local jurisdiction, or for that matter, any private party to any participation necessarily. So for example, if a project were to matriculate in this process and be recommended for funding, that project would still need to be approved by your local jurisdictions or go through whatever the normal planning process is for project approval. So this is a mechanism for making recommendations for long-term funding in infrastructure, but it does not replace the local kind of review and approval process, which I think is really important. So the program is intended to be deployed in 2 phases. The first phase is a $5 million planning grant, and each of the 13 regions will receive a $5 million planning grant. And then the second phase is a $500 million investment in infrastructure. They are still writing the guidelines on phase 2. This is why I pointed out this is phase 1, not phase 2, right? We expect the guidelines for the phase 2 investments to come out sometime, well, you know, their initial timeline said November. I would expect them in January or February. The state is about 2 months behind on their timeline on deploying the program. So I would expect those phase 2 guidelines in November. And then this planning process that we will participate in will actually be aligned with the guidelines for that for the phase 2 infrastructure investment, so that the plan will eventually be making recommendations for how that infrastructure investment should be deployed. So that's the kind of the theory behind how this is going to work. So the regions. Oh, wait, there's our time. See, you can see we're already 2 months off on our timeline, right? We thought the awards were going to be in September. So basically, though, the rest of this timeline holds true. Just push it forward 2 months. Like, we would expect that if the awards come out in November, that we will probably be looking at doing all of the research components of this at the beginning of next year. So, and I'll describe what those components are in just a minute. So the Eastern Sierra region, let's talk about the region that the process is applying to begin with. First, I have to tell you, everyone in the actual Eastern Sierra is laughing about the point that we've renamed the 7 counties in the Central Sierra Nevada the Eastern Sierra. So when I do this presentation in Bishop and Mammoth, I get a good chuckle because they have their own identity based on the Eastern Sierra mindset and ethic, right? But it's basically a 7-county region. So it includes the 3 counties on the eastern slope of the crest of the Sierra, Alpine, Mono, and Inyo, and that includes the counties on the west slope of Amador, Calaveras, Tuolumne, and Mariposa. And it is indeed convenient that there are community organizations representing those collections of counties on both sides of the Sierra Nevada. So it's been great to work with the Central Sierra Economic Development District and look at how we can align this work with that organization, and they are indeed one of the partners we identified in the application process. Also great to work with the Motherlode Job Training Center, which covers the western side of this geography. They were also included in the planning process and the grant application. On the east side of the Sierra Nevada, we've been working very closely with the Eastern Sierra Council of Governments. So you guys have a crossover with Alpine, rather, who kind of works on both sides, which is good for little Alpine, right? And then we've also been working really closely with the newly formed Eastern Sierra Business Resource Center based in Bishop, which will be opening this fall or early spring, and is an investment on the part of Inyo County in regional economic development technical assistance. So we've been working closely with at least 3 or 4 different groups. So we've already done some preliminary research on this region and submitted it along with the application. It is a large, diverse region, difficult to serve, especially in the winter when most of the passes are closed. But 19,000 square miles, you'll see it's one of the largest regions in that regional map. 7 counties, 186,000 people. The only regions I think that are more difficult to get around in for planning purposes are that North State region, which is actually 11 counties, and the high desert region, which the benefit they have is that almost all of their population is focused on the western side of that region, so it's a little bit easier for them to plan. But it's been, it will be a really interesting process to serve the entire region. If we were awarded the grant, we would plan on basing staff in Sonora and in Bishop in order to serve the process on both sides of the Sierra Nevada. And then we've already looked at what like the current economic drivers in that region are. And probably no surprise to any of you that have been looking at local economics, government, retail trade, healthcare, and social assistance. Actually, really, the healthcare sector is a really interesting one with which is still expanding. So a lot of opportunity for higher wage jobs in healthcare, which I think is kind of a fascinating opportunity. Accommodation and food services and construction. So these are like the highest, the most populated sectors right now. And then the potential growth sectors that we've identified so far in our research include forestry and biomass utilization. So the forestry issue is really interesting with, you've had some of the worst wildfires in the state of California in Tuolumne County. I think you guys know better than just about anyone else that adapting to wildfire and preventing future wildfire is going to create a lot of jobs, and everyone is struggling right now with how to get people to actually do those jobs. Every forestry company we've talked to is looking for heavy equipment operators, truck drivers, environmental planning associates, or even just labor for forest thinning or prescribed fires. So we're anticipating that forest management is going to be one of the sectors we're going to dive deep into and look at what the opportunities for investment are there. Forest health and fire mitigation, climate and energy innovation. There's a lot of funding out there now for energy efficiency, whole building retrofits, renewable energy, electric vehicle charging networks, fleet expansion, logistics support around electric vehicles, and then new technologies around energy innovation that are really beginning to spread across the state of California as far as manufacturing and distribution are concerned. So that's definitely one. And then we are also looking at this issue of sustainable tourism and how we can use the tourism economy to begin identifying opportunities for things like gear manufacturing, experiential education, and outdoor experiences, guiding services, the types of things that are actually higher wage jobs within high altitude sports training, things like that. Things that are higher wage jobs within the tourism sector where there's a niche because of the expansion of tourism, of recreation, kind of particularly with the younger generation, and then their addiction to gear, which is really kind of interesting. Who would have thought a bicycle would cost $5,000? You know, like when I bought my Schwinn Stingray, I never would have thought that, right? So there's a lot of opportunity around some of these areas that we should be looking at. So a little bit of statistical data on Tuolumne County from the existing assessments that are out there. And this was part of the background information that we used for the Sierra Nevada Climate Vulnerability Assessment. Medium household income, $60,000 a year, but living wage calculation, if you actually take a living wage calculator and apply what does it cost to live in Tuolumne County, would show that a living wage, in order to actually meet all of the basic human needs for a family, is about $75,000 a year. So there's a gap here between what people are earning with their current employment base and what is necessary for essentially a high quality standard of living. So this is a really interesting issue and one that this program is intended to take a look at. And then sensitive groups with the highest populations within this region. We've identified several. Residents without broadband is one of the top ones for a variety of different reasons. Not only do they not have opportunity to remote learning, remote medicine, or jobs, they also are extremely difficult to evacuate in a wildfire situation, right? So there's like a multiple kind of a risk factor for people without high-speed communications. And that's probably one of the highest vulnerabilities in the area. Housing burden residents, so this is residents of the county that are paying more than 30% of their salary for housing. Tuolumne County has a pretty high number of housing burdened residents at 42%. It's a really interesting thing if you look across the state of California. Many of the rural counties actually have a higher housing burden than some of the urban counties. So for example, there are 5 or 6 counties in Northern California that have a higher housing burden than San Francisco and Los Angeles do. Whenever we read about housing in California, we think San Francisco and LA, right? The reality is because wages are so much higher there, the percentage of their income they're paying in housing is actually lower than it is in a lot of rural California. And that means the percentage of your income you have as disposable for other things like healthcare and education goes down in rural California, right? So this housing burden issue is a really big, it's a big deal. So, and then the other things, other kind of sensitive groups within the region, a higher proportion of senior citizens in across the entire Sierra Nevada actually, but also in your county, and that has its own set of sensitivities around kind of economic opportunity and vulnerability in a disaster event. So, and then there is a capacity score that we looked at as well, which is the capacity of the community to essentially adapt to change. There is a methodology that has been developed out there for assessing community capacity. Tuolumne County is like right about in the middle, so not really great, but not really terrible either. And if you look across the state of California, some of the places really are pretty terrible as far as their capacity to adapt. And that means really the social capacity to absorb a shock like a recession or a wildfire or a pandemic or, you know, a climate event or whatever it is, right? So this is an issue that we'll be looking at as part of this process as well. How do we increase the capacity of the community to absorb a shock in an unanticipated event? Then, as I mentioned, we recently completed a Sierra Nevada-wide climate vulnerability assessment. Actually, one of our team members, Erica Harvey, was the primary author on this assessment, and it looked at climatic kind of change within the region based on past history and projected future, and then looked at what the percentage change to historical average would be by 2064. And the statistics are kind of stunning. Like many of us who have lived in the Sierra for more than 30 or 40 years have noticed some of these changes already. Increasing daytime temperature, the average change from the historic mean is projected to go up by about 700%, from 4 days to somewhere between 16 and 58 days by 2064, which creates a significant kind of set of challenges around things like air conditioning, energy efficiency, renewables, all the things that you need to do to adapt to those increasing temperatures. Nighttime temperatures from 6 to 16 to 55 nights, or 450% increase. Wildfire acreage burned increasing 72% by 2064, which is a little daunting to many of us in the region. And then snow water equivalent, so average snowfall within the region, which is, of course, I know we have Tuolumne Utilities District in the room, pretty important figure for water supply and also for wildfire risk, looking at losing about 37% of the snowpack between now and 2064. So it creates this set of issues that could be looked at as kind of a crisis, or they could be looked at as an opportunity for adaptation and creating living wage jobs around adapting to those changes through things like applications of new technology, forestry, biomass utilization, sustainable recreation and tourism, and these other things. So you can look at it as the glass half full or glass half empty. We want to look at those and see what are the job creation opportunities that come out of that create high wage jobs. So, okay, some of the things that we're going to be required to track as part of this program, should we get it, include our outreach attempts around equity. So how much have we increased baseline employment and income levels for residents of the region? Equitable access to workforce training and investment capital. So access to capital is certain to be one of the things that we need to look at. Like, how do we create more opportunities, for example, for small and medium businesses to get low cost, low risk capital through things like micro lending programs or SBA loan programs or business technical assistance or other things like that. We'll also be looking at things like how do we elevate local businesses for state contracting. It's interesting to me that across the Sierra, not a lot of the Sierra businesses have gone through the process to actually access preferential treatment in state contracting, which can actually be quite lucrative. And then there's also, this whole process to look at minority, low-income, and women-owned businesses and improving their access to capital as part of a process like this. So we're going to need to measure inclusion in the process. So this is the number of disinvested communities engaged in the SURF process, and then how effective that engagement has been to bring people to the table. We are somewhat concerned that in this region, it's going to be difficult to get lower income residents to participate in the process. So we're going to need your help in reaching out to the community to get more engagement and involvement throughout the process. We've had some involvement so far in tribal entities, and we're expecting more, but we could use more help in getting tribal groups to participate in the process as well. So that will be one of the metrics in the process. Transparency, so how are we doing an outreach and how frequently are we touching the community with meetings and other things, websites, things like that. Looking at increasing capacity for participating community-based organizations. So we did include in our grant application capacity building funding for both the Central Sierra Economic Development District and the Mother Lode Job Training Center on the West Slope. Also capacity building for Eastern Sierra Council of Governments and the Business Resource Center on the east side. But there's an additional roughly $1 million in funding in the budget for capacity building in community organizations. So it is something that we're going to be looking at throughout the process. Now that capacity building is really focused on participation in this process or building skills for participation in this process. And we're not sure exactly how those would be deployed yet. So that will be part of the process, is looking at how we can elevate the capacity within the region. And then finally, we are of course going to be required to measure the number of high impact projects have been planned and advanced in the plan itself, and what the funding leverage is and the jobs created. So this will be a program that at the end of the day, I think will be really closely scrutinized. I think there's a lot of question about whether or not this kind of investment in economic development planning that is more long range actually returns investment. So did we spend $600 million wisely? So I'm anticipating that we're going to have to answer all those questions at the end of this process. So finally, a little bit about the application itself. Both of your jurisdictions signed a collective partnership agreement to at least participate in this process. We wanted to thank you for that. Very important to have local government representation in the governance model for this project. So it was really great to have your support there. All of the documentation for the program is actually available on our website at this point. All of the presentations that we've done, the partnership agreements, and everything else. We also have quite a bit of work to do around recruiting let's talk about regional data. So the types of things that we're going to be required to collect as a part of this process. So we're required to do a regional stakeholder analysis for the economic development process. We will be doing a regional economic summary. That will look very much like the one you're doing for your SEDS at the Central Sierra Economic Development District, by the way, or your Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. So we are working with the same consultant that you guys are working on. If we get this project, we would use the same consultant to do the regional economic data for this region. We're required to do a labor market analysis. I know that Dave Taney and Mother Corps have a lot of resources for that. There are other state and federal resources out there as well. A regional economic cluster analysis, which identifies high wage growth industry areas. A regional workforce education and training analysis. looking at who are and where are the disinvested communities within the region. That is the low-income communities or the communities that had low levels of investment around workforce, education and training, or capital infusion. We are required to look at the regional climate analysis. Kind of convenient that we just did one. So we have a lot of that data already. We're required to do kind of a public health analysis to look at what are the public health risks within the region. We will, if we were to get this grant, we would be working likely with Cal Poly Humboldt, who is the contractor who does regional health analysis for many of the counties across the state, and for the State Department of Public Health as well. So we have kind of good sources that we could go to share some of this analysis burden. We're required to look at alignment with state policy. As I said, that if we got the contract, we would work with Cal State Chico to do the economic data, and then SBC would do the climate data. So that's kind of the plan for the data analysis that would back up the decisions about where investment should go. We already covered that. Let's talk about governance. So, and this is probably the last big piece, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion, okay? One of the things that we were required to do with the application was to submit a draft governance model. So how would decisions be made, and who would make the decisions, right? So what we came up with is this model that would spread representation across the geography of the region, so that there is a 21-member council that would lead this process, and a non-voting chair of the council who would actually work with us to manage meetings, but would not have a vote. So what we were trying to do is take the power of the chair. Is there a board chair here today? We're trying to take the power of the chair out of the process, so that the council is actually level as far as who can advance agenda items and other things. So we do have an agreement around who would serve as that non-voting chair along with SBC staff, and that is likely to be Barbara Hayes of the Rural County Representatives of California, who is working on SURF in this area as well, who we thought had a pretty good nonpartisan, cross-the-board appeal. So anyway, 21 members, a non-voting chair, 3 members from each county or cities within the counties. 5 are chairs of committees, so the HRTC council members are intended to also serve on a committee. And then the representation across the remainder of the seats would be based on that matrix of required stakeholders that we're required to bring to the table. So those stakeholders would include community-based organizations, workforce education and training organizations, business organizations, environmental organizations, all of the stakeholders in the community that have a say around kind of how projects are going to be advanced, and also public members. So totally open to public members on both the committees and the HRTC as well. It's really important to remember that this council is not actually making the decision about whether a project is approved. That authority still rests with local government for whatever the normal planning process is, or the private entity that would be advancing a project. So, and then the council would be served by these 5 committees. One, looking at these issues of equity, climate, and labor. How do we include high-wage jobs within this region? How are we aligning this with regional climate adaptation objectives like fire resiliency and other things? One would be focused on business and workforce development, so really focused on this issue of what are the specific types of businesses that could be advanced. One that would be a local government committee that would be looking at alignment between things like local government capital improvement plans and local government economic development elements and other things, and this plan. There would be a data planning and drafting committee, because remember, the output is a plan, right? But there needs to be a process to vet the content of that plan. So this committee would be the first place that's vetted before it goes up to the HRTC for continued debate and discussion. And then finally, there would be a project committee. And the project committee would identify the projects for for inclusion for recommendations for funding within the plan. It is our intent to have that project committee to be equally spread across all 7 counties and also to advance plans as batches instead of single projects. So that committee would be looking at, like, what are the plans that would achieve the goals of, or what are the projects that would achieve the goals of the plan? And then how can we advance a suite of projects for inclusion within the plan in order to kind of try to reduce competition, regional competition for funding and other things like that. So they're just one of the kind of concerns in the process is we don't want to create a lot of fighting, we want to create a lot of consensus, right? Like that's our goal. Our goal is consensus in the region and investment in things that will increase high-wage jobs. So this is a list of the required stakeholders within the process. As I've said, we've done a pretty good job reaching out to all of these entities, but we're not getting like all of the participation we would need yet. If we do get this grant and this contract, we will do another round of public outreach to make sure that we're getting as much participation as possible. And so far, we're a little weak on tribal representation and environmental representation in this process. So we will be doing some work in the community to try to make sure that we can get a really well-balanced group across the region. So for additional information about the program itself, we've provided some links to the Governor's Office of Planning and Research website. There's a very short, pithy announcement video if you want to see it. My guess is there'll be an award video up on the Governor's website, probably on October 25th is my guess. And then the full program guidelines and the request for proposal that we responded to is available on the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency website in their RFP section or the EDD website if you go there. So with that, I want to open it for questions.
All right, thank you for that presentation. I'm going to look at Mayor Plummer. If you don't mind, maybe what we'll do is we'll just have, what we do is, our board's been doing lately, is we just have clarifying questions based on the information presented. And once we ask our questions, open it up to the public if they want to comment, and then we'll bring it back for discussion and our, comments moving forward. So are you good with that, Mayor Plummer? You might have to use this.
Yes, that's dandy.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm going to say it again. If anybody has a clarifying question from the information presented, just raise your hand. We'll get the mic to you. Start with
I
Plummer.
did have a question about the public health analysis. Is fire included in that? Because one of the things that excites me about this particular, the time we're in, and especially this effort, is that I, for a decade or so, have been seeing or thinking of thinning projects coupled with some use of the material as a growth industry. It should be a high growth industry, and those are often, the mechanical requirements to run thinning machines are fairly demanding and pretty well paid, especially.
Yes, they are.
So I'm a timber faller. So I come out of this environment, and I'm seeing this as an incredible opportunity, one, to meet several other things, but like I say, public health analysis. If fire is one of the things we're looking at from public health, then with this, we would hit quite a few of the project goals and also create really good, sustainable, long-term jobs. So, is that correct?
Yes, it is. So the public health analysis would look at the effect of wildfire smoke on public health. Many of you may know that recent long-term studies of the effect of wildfire smoke show that it has somewhere between 8 and 10 times the impact of vehicle-related black carbon emissions because of the size of the particulate matter. So reducing wildfire smoke could be looked at as one of the strategies to improve public health in this process. And the way you would do that would be by increasing forest thinning, removing the open pile burning and using biomass for other purposes, for example, renewable fuels or energy or cross-laminated timber or mass timber products or things like that. So that's definitely one of the nexes we want to look at.
Okay.
So.
thank you. I find that very exciting and promising.
Questions?
Yeah, this works. I have a bunch. Want to skip me and come back, see what gets answered?
Okay. Question? We'll just go around this way.
I'm really interested to learn more about the investment segment of this. I'm encouraged to hear that you are viewing this as an investment, specifically with our municipal infrastructure, things like, this very building or like, say, City Hall. I'd love to see a huge component of this going towards reducing ongoing costs incurred by local government, things like, paying our bills, deferred maintenance and things like that, because I see it as just a slam dunk immediate way to save the taxpayer money, to allocate our own funds towards more meaningful projects in the future. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on any concrete stuff that might be looked at in that regard.
I can elaborate on the potential, but not necessarily on what this HRTC is going to decide to invest in. I want to be clear about that, right? So you hit a really interesting issue. So there's a ton of opportunity in California to invest in energy efficiency, renewable energy, new building operations technologies, things like ground source heat pumps, solar hot water heating, building control mechanisms, renewables, not just biomass, but also solar, micro wind, micro hydro, all of those sorts of things that are part of the statewide kind of climate strategy. And these aren't even necessarily, this just makes sense economically to reduce, as you put it, the cost of operations, right? Like for many of these things, the big problem is that the initial payback period is a little bit too long for a lot of entities, right? Although that is shrinking over time, right? So I would anticipate that one of the sectors this process will look at is building operations, energy efficiency, renewable energy, building retrofits, and the entire universe of jobs that can be created around that. And there's a lot of really good data in California about how many jobs and what the wages and benefits attached to those jobs are. If you're interested, the Luskin Center in Los Angeles has a regional analysis. There are regional analyses around a number of different areas in the state of California, right? But these are good paying jobs. So in essence, the contractors who are doing these installs are, making in the high 80 to 100 to $120,000 a year. And the labor that's doing it is making in that range as well, right? So if we're looking at how do you take the average wage in the county from that $60,000 a year level to above the $75,000 a year level, which is the living wage calculator number, energy efficiency and renewables is a real opportunity. So I would hope this process will at least look at that, and then the council will have to make the decision about what kinds of investments are recommended. I would note, however, that the Inflation Reduction Act has $368 billion in it for that type of work. And California will likely get 10% of that funding, right? So over the next 5 to 10 years, California will be getting about $36 billion for exactly that purpose. So.
Yeah, the reason I bring it up is because you mentioned the desire of this entity to find as many, compatible sources of funding that, would align with our goals. So I see that as an easy slam dunk if this is, we decide to go forward with this plan of potentially bringing a lot of cost savings and major, future investment in our community. So thank you for that.
Great, thanks.
Hi, so I have some tough questions. So over the past few years, large companies have left California because the corporate tax rate is so high. Tesla, I even Googled a couple of them, Arctic Wolf, Hewlett-Packard, Aerospace. I'm not really keen on grants only because I wish the state wouldn't take our money in the first place and then ask for us to beg for it back through the form of a grant. And then I look at your overview and I see that planning will establish regional inclusive planning tables. There's a lot of planning going on, bolster equity outcomes, transition to carbon neutrality. like, it just seems like a lot of reports, which I'd rather, again, like just to see the state of California not take our tax money, so we don't have to beg for it back through grants. Reducing overregulation, dropping our tax rate. I think South Dakota just had a huge tax cut to incentivize their businesses. So I don't even know that there's an answer to that, but these are the things that come across my mind as I listen to this. Thank you.
Totally legitimate concern, and I hope you'll bring those concerns to the table and we can discuss them. So I do want to point out that I think one of the objectives here is find the things that you can do, that you are already investing in, that you want to scale, and see how we can use the state funding to advance those things, right? So I don't think I can answer your bigger question, but at the local community level, you know, I think the question that we should be asking throughout this process is, how do we take advantage of the state funding to do the stuff that will really make a difference for our local communities and will create good jobs, right? And some of these other things come along as a part of that, and that might be fine. So, but thank you for the question, appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity and for the presentation. I have 3 questions. We'll start with an easy one. I don't see anywhere, and I don't remember you saying, what does HRTC stand for?
Oh, yeah, this is funny. So it stands for High Road Transition Council. And the reason it's called that is because that's what the state wanted us to call it in the application. But assuming someone gets the grant for the region, they can rebrand it to whatever name they want to call it,
Okay.
right? We think it's kind of wonky, you know?
Okay.
I would just call it the Governance Council or something simple, so people, you know, regular people know what it means.
Okay, and then you mentioned something just a short while ago, the statistic about the forest fire smoke versus emissions from vehicles. Where did you, I'd like to get that information specifically. I want to know where you got that from, because I think that would be valuable to include in a, let's see, a climate action plan maybe.
Yeah, what do you know?
Yeah.
So we can get that information to you. So there have been a couple of different longitudinal studies of kind of wildfire smoke and air quality impact in California. But I think that most recent one was, it was either done by the American Lung Association or it was supported in a partnership through the American Lung Association. But I'll find it for you and send
And
it
it's
to you.
specific to California?
It's specific to California.
Okay. And my last question, I was actually very surprised. You don't have these pages numbered, but under your potential high growth sectors, you don't mention broadband, like deployment and infrastructure, yet you do mention it on the next page as it's a sensitive group with the highest population. So why isn't broadband infrastructure deployment under high growth sector jobs?
So 2 reasons. Number one, sometimes we make mistakes. Number two, one of the things to think about in this program, and we think one of the challenges in this program is going to be, if you read the guidelines for the program itself, there is an inclination in the program to point infrastructure funding for some of these purposes like broadband and housing to the already existing state pots of funding. So although we will likely take broadband into the planning context and might even make recommendations that broadband infrastructure be expanded and invested in, we believe that the state's preference is going to be that those fundings, that funding request goes to the California Advanced Services Fund and the broadband bond measures that were passed by the legislature over the last 2 years.
Okay.
And the same is true of housing, by the way, because there's been so much increased investment in kind of affordable and achievable housing. We think that we can include housing in the planning process, but probably not in the infrastructure investments. But that will become clearer when we get the phase 2 program guidelines. They might include broadband.
Well, you did say, find the things that you're already doing.
Right.
And we know we're already doing that, and we will be doing this, so that would make an argument for inclusion, but this is just the question time, so I'll stop with my comments.
I don't really have a question, but I have been involved in this process sort of tangentially through the Central Sierra Economic Development Council and been very excited about it and reported it back to the City Council. But I wish you great luck on this, on your committee and planning and selection. And hope that everyone is very collaborative because this could be a great boost for all 7 counties.
Thank you.
I guess one question and then I'll give a comment on the Tuolumne County risk profile, where it lists the hazards and modeled historical data, that sort of thing. Where did these numbers come from?
So those came from the Sierra Nevada Climate Vulnerability Assessment that was recently completed through a grant from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and a copy of and Sierra Business Council did that project for the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and you can find the full report on our website.
Okay, excellent.
And it sources the data based on like where that information came from and everything else.
Perfect. And then my only comment is echoing the mayor and then also Councilmember Cruz. You know, I don't like grants either, but the fact is that this is something I think we all need to jump on, and thanking the county, our county board and CAO for making sure that we were here. I do appreciate that, so.
So a couple of questions. So in the initial stages, each region gets the $5 million to work on the whole HRTC process,
right,
and get that set up. When it comes down to the secondary funding, the large pot of money, right? So they, you know, my 2 questions. One, will those funds initially be allocated evenly, like 1/13, you know, of that fund to each region? And then once you have the regions, how do the funds get allocated? In our case, the 7 counties, is that driven by population? You know, how do we foresee?
So let's answer the first question, which is we do not know yet whether or not that $500 million pot of funding will be distributed evenly across the 13 regions. If they were, it would be roughly $40 million per region. We have been advocating for that. I can honestly say 11 other regions in the state of California have been advocating for that. Los Angeles and San Francisco aren't quite as happy as we are about advocating for that. We're going to have to see what happens when the guidelines come out. I don't know whether it will be an equal allocation or not. I think it will probably be a competitive process for those grants. But I think that there is a principle stated in the program itself for equitable distribution of funding across the state that we can leverage to try to get our fair share of funding out of that pot. But the answer right now is we don't know yet. And I don't anticipate that we will know until the guidelines come out. And as I said, I think that will likely be January. The second question, how do we make recommendations on funding? So it's not a direct path from the recommendation to the funding. So there's going to be a set of recommendations tied to the plan, and then whatever the state agency is that controls the funding will do a grant process to essentially fund grants based on applications. So, so there's still going to be an application process likely at the end of this, but because it's included within the plan and it meets all of these metrics and the means of measuring the benefit and everything else, it's much more likely to get funded. And I also want to point out that this likely means that other projects that aren't applying to that fund, for example, through the Department of Transportation or HCD or others, if it's included in this plan, it will likely get a higher kind of consideration for funding, which I think is really important, especially when you look at the infrastructure funds that the state of California is going to be distributing, right? So between, you know, Bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and IRA, that $80 billion that's coming down to the state over the next 5 years or so. If these projects are included in these plans, I think it increases their likelihood of funding there. So.
Okay, so I think you kind of answered the second one, but not quite. So when they do the plan, and they work amongst, representatives from the 7 counties, so is that driven or not somewhat by population base as far as the distribution of the funds?
I think the recommendations for what projects should be included and recommended for funding within the plan will be made by that HRTC. So there's no tie necessarily to population base or other things. My guess is, though, the criteria for recommending projects is going to take that into consideration. Is going to take equitable distribution of funding across that 7-county region into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll go after you.
Great, thank you. I wanted to echo actually what Supervisor Goldenberg was asking there. Those were the same questions that were on my mind. Just one concern with this, and that's on the question. We have 7 counties. Calaveras and Tuolumne represent nearly half of that population, and it's going to be a vote of the 7 of how we allocate it. And that's with the 5 Central Sierra Economic Development Agencies, but then Mono and Inyo, anything kind of along there, that's a lot of geographic territory.
Yes.
So I would certainly advocate for a distribution model that's based on population as the fairest to it, when we're including quite a spread of how many people we have in each county. That was my first question, was of the 500 million, how many hundreds of millions are going to LA? And then what are we splitting up for the rest? So I'm happy to hear there's advocacy there. I wanted to ask, how is it aligning with the 5-year Central Sierra Economic Development District plan? So what steps are being taken to kind of put those together?
So Sierra Business Council staff has been attending the Central Sierra Economic Development District board meetings where the SEDS is being discussed. The consulting team that is working on the SEDS, which is the North State Planning and Development Collective at California State University at Chico, if we were to be awarded this project for the Eastern Sierra, would be the consultant that we would use to do the economic data for this region. So the same, essentially consulting team would be doing the economic data on the 2 plans, right? And then it would be our intent as part of this process to align the SURF strategies with the SEDS strategies as far as their strategies for implementation over that 5-year period. Now, I can't guarantee that all of them would be aligned, because remember, we have another set of objectives in this program around high-wage jobs and kind of inclusion, equity, and disinvested communities. But to the maximum extent practicable, we would want to take the SEDS strategies and incorporate them into the SURF. And finally, a third point on this is that our team that is working on this, who are on Zoom today, Kristen York and Erica Harvey, have been doing SEDS in other regions of the Sierra. So they're very intimately familiar with that SEDS process and how it leads to infrastructure funding from US EDA and others. So I think they have the experience to understand how the 2 can dovetail together.
Okay, great. This is similar question, but maybe a point to the SEDS discussions. There have been multiple previous 5-year plans, and just making sure that we're doing an assessment of what was successful, what wasn't, and how this is going to be different in it, especially since SURF is going to change the environment there quite a bit. You mentioned that there's going to be staff support based out of Sonora there. I wanted to ask, what does that mean for the city and county as far as, is it part of a position? Is that a mother job training? Is that a dedicated position? Is it a couple?
Yeah, so let's talk about the
All of
staffing
them.
model.
Great. You said yeah, and like, oh, okay.
So the answer is yes, but
Great.
should we receive this grant, we would have a project manager based in Truckee, but spending a significant amount of time here. We would have 2 project support staff, one based living in and working in Sonora, and one based in and living in hopefully somewhere in the Bishop area, right? Then we would have 2 program support staff that would work across that entire region. So at a minimum, there would be one staff member based here and one staff member based in Bishop, but then there would be 3 additional staff members who were focusing on different elements of the planning process and coming down to the region for that purpose. Unless, of course, we identify another staff person that we could hire here. I have to, this is totally anecdotal and off the point. I would much rather hire staff in Sonora than Truckee, I can tell you that right now. I can't find people. You know, we have a remote working model at Sierra Business Council. You know, I'd much rather have staff in the Sierra foothills than in the Tahoe Basin. It's just, you know, untenable for people to live there at this point.
Great. And have there been any discussions with the UC Ag and Natural Resources or Cooperative Extension? They've received a lot of new staff positions, woody biomass food systems, et cetera, to have some type of maybe a joint position able to work and add extra staffing?
Oh, that's a really interesting idea. We haven't talked about a joint position, but we have talked quite a bit about collaborating and coordinating with UC Ag and Natural Resources. And we've been working on the teams that have been hiring UC Ag and Natural Resources Co-op Extension advisors in a couple of different regions of the Sierra. So I think that opportunity for collaboration with them is really high. Do you happen to know the new position in the Central Sierra for UC Ag and Natural Resources? Is it focused on biomass utilization?
There is a woody biomass position for the entire Sierra based out of Tuolumne, a food systems person, and then some other additional investments, yeah.
Okay, no, that's a great opportunity. We'll follow up on that.
Great.
So-
I want to ask to mention labor. What labor, so we have construction trades in that, but we don't really have a Central Sierra Labor Council in the same way as other areas. Is that limited to construction trades? Is that public unions? Is that public safety?
It isn't, but the only kind of labor representation that has expressed like interest so far are the members of the Motherlode Job Training Center, which Dave, maybe you can give me a little more, or give Jaron a little more data on that if you want to. We have talked to the North Valley Labor Federation, the Fresno, Madera Labor Council. We've also had some conversations with some of the construction and building trades unions, so the Northern California Regional Council of Carpenters and the operating engineers. We haven't talked to any of the like service unions like SEIU or the public employee unions or anyone like that yet. And to be honest with you, I don't think this is not a program that is designed to scale up public sector jobs.
Right.
You know what I mean? This is really a program that is designed to create private sector business opportunities and private sector jobs. So
Okay.
my anticipation would be the labor unions interested would be more focused on that.
And if I read it correctly, of the different HRTC memberships that the county will be choosing for, it'll be 3 per county?
There will be 3 representatives on the council per county, but that does not necessarily mean 3 local government representatives, because remember, we have to have a representative council that includes all of those stakeholder groups.
Right.
So
With that, I wanted to ask about the conflict of interest policy. So how is that to be approached with, say, the business and workforce issue where we may want to put, for example, a chamber or a business advocacy group that may have members working on projects, or put a member organization that's working on a project on there? So how is the conflict of interest handled, since everybody's asking for money for their thing?
Yeah, I think we'd have to talk to your county and city councils about how they would interpret those sorts of conflict of interest issues. I can't answer that question right now.
Okay, and
To be
is Sierra
honest.
Nevada Conservancy able to be the climate rep, or is that a conflict?
We weren't anticipating it at this point, but having the Sierra Nevada Conservancy involved in the process would be most welcome.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I only had just one last point on it.
I just want to point out,
Yeah.
they can't take an official seat on a council or a commission like this as a state agency, right? But having them involved in the process, I think would be a really good idea.
Good to know, thank you. And I wanted to just, one other thing is in trying to leverage the funding, I hope before we start talking projects and as this moves forward, we'll have some type of a presentation on just what direction has the state and feds been moving in as far as specific funding pots and the accessibility for rural communities. So what does USDA rural development look like? So we're not only informing it based on what assets we have and what we're currently doing very well, but we're putting that through a lens of how can we get a lot more? Because 40 million, which does sound like a lot of money, right, is not a lot when we think of a pellet plant that's 340 million or a wastewater treatment plant. One county, one project could eat up way more than that. So making sure that we're hopefully more putting plans together to access other funding.
Totally get it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I do want to warn on one thing. The state will be undergoing a parallel process to think through what are the priorities for investment for funding coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. I think it's really important in this process that we look at that alignment at the end of the planning term, right? I'm not anticipating that we're going to see state priorities or what their criteria is going to be for establishing priorities probably for a year. Like they're just starting to put that process together right now, so.
I just have kind of a big, broad question that I'll open up to the community if they have any comments. So I have lots of questions and comments, but I think the easiest way for me to put it and what I'm trying to hone in on and understand is on this page where it says, what is SURF? One-time use of general funds that will distribute $600 million to regions across California to support inclusive and low carbon economic development. And as I read the report, I keep seeing economics and then climate. And so what I'm trying to tie the dots between is like Supervisor Half said, we have this climate action plan that we're dealing with. I see the state is putting out unprecedented monies in certain areas to address climate change. And then I see that there's a $600 million potential investment here in California to develop economic and, like you had said, create private sector positions. So how do we as a county, and kind of Supervisor Brandon's point, if we get 40 million, that's really not a ton of money when you dealing with 7 counties, but how do we, if we have potentially 3, we have Sierra Pacific Industries, we have Ultra Power, we have potentially 3 other biomass facilities coming online in the next couple of years. Help me connect the dot. How do I get this money to support those programs and what they're doing? Because I'm not sure I understand how we can do that.
Yeah, to be honest with you, we're not 100% clear on the funding pathway at this point either. And we won't be until the guidelines and the distribution process are laid out for phase 2 investments, probably in January. But the way we think this is going to work is that the planning process will be going on. Recommendations will be made for projects in the planning process. Those projects that have been recommended in the planning process will then apply to EDD for funding. And it's based on the Labor and Workforce Development Board funding process, which looks at what is the nexus between the infrastructure investment and the job creation, right? So we don't know what all of the guidelines are going to be yet, but clearly that's going to be one of them. And then we anticipate that if a project qualifies for funding under the SURF program, it will likely still be able to go for funding in other state programs that might support that project, right? Okay. So for example, Climate Catalyst Fund funding for a biomass facility, or CAL FIRE funding in their workforce development program for a biomass facility, that this would act as one piece of funding that could layer into a project. I know that's really difficult, so for project developers, like we're working on projects like this where we're layering different elements of state funding right now. It's really hard to do. I get that, right? But I think that's the most likely pathway for the funding, right? So really that issue of leverage, like how can you use the SURF allocations to create leverage for other project funding is going to be really critical. I hope that answered your question.
Kind of, and what I kind of got was that we still don't really know. But
yeah, and let's for anyone that develops projects that are funded by grant-funded programs, like YouTube pointed this out, right? Like it's a difficult and arduous process, right? So you guys are working on a climate action plan. I'm sure you have implementation measures in that climate action plan. There are going to be a number of different funding sources that you need to look to do that. And every one of those is going to be an individual project application.
Is the state looking, as they're creating these guidelines or these ideas, are they looking, where are they getting their information from as far as how to guide their, I guess, are they reaching out to you guys or to the local communities to help guide their formulation of this decision-making process?
Of the guidelines themselves?
Yeah.
They will have an open guideline process. Usually the way that looks is they release a draft set of guidelines, they take public comment on that, they amend or update the guidelines based on that public comment and then publish them.
Okay, so we will, it sounds like we may have a chance to weigh in with during
Yes.
the public comment process for, okay.
Well, and my guess is on these guidelines, there will be a lot of people weighing in across the state. So if you're members of CSAC, that's probably an opportunity to weigh in. If you're a member of the League of California Cities, that's an opportunity to weigh in, or any other rural county representatives of California, I'm sure, will comment on these. Sierra Business Council will be commenting on these. My guess is CalEd, California Local Economic Development.
So then it might be wise to be a part of that conversation. That way we can try and set ourselves up for when there is an approval, there's a lane that we can jump into that we're already, because like you said, we're already working on so many of these areas. For me, it's a matter of getting the state to understand the rural counties and rural way of life and how we can offset emissions, how we can offset what they call to be climate change. It really comes down to fire and emissions, and we need to get them to understand that up here locally. So, okay. All right, with that being said, I'm going to open up to public for public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the city and county for any further discussion. So is there any public comment in the room? Do you have some? Sure. And we do have the 3-minute rule that we have to abide by. So just
are you good at time?
It'll be on that clock right
Okay. Okay, first I have a question, and that is, how can the county sign an agreement when the funding is not guaranteed at this point? Kind of don't understand that. Anytime I see the word regionalism, sustainability, I think of the UN, and of course I went and did a search, and the UN website also has a CERF program, CERF. I do not like this, not one bit. I'm not going to tear into it today, but I will say that I think people need to understand something. This is basically to consolidate collaboration of the global and regional effort to conspire against the idea of private property. So eventually, with no boundaries between the counties, you know, it's not going to be like people think it's going to be. It's going to be global governance. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, please go to the UN website and start studying up on what's going on in this world here. Because there's a lot of things globally that's happening, and that's happening in every city, county, and state. And there's something wrong here, that I'm still seeing stuff about sustainability, and none of the supervisors apparently went through the books I gave them or didn't read about it enough. You need to delve deeper.
Is there any other public comment in the room? No, not seeing any. Yes, Dave.
So, hi, I'm Dave Taney, and I'm the director at Motherload Job Training, and also I serve the board of the Central Sierra Economic Development District. And I just wanted to throw support behind the Sierra Business Council and their efforts. This SURF grant was only available to a select number of entities, education, tribes, nonprofits, or economic development entities. So our board, the Central Sierra Economic Development District Board, and Ann Segerstrom's on that board as well, we were going to apply for the grant because we didn't know there were nonprofits that were interested. We knew the tribes and the educational institutions weren't interested. So I'm not crazy about grants either, but if the grant money is flowing, it's our job to get as much of it as we can as advocates for our area. The idea of taking money and then redistributing it is a higher level question, but we want to make sure we're getting our fair share. But what I wanted to say is we were going to apply for this because we already have an economic development district with 5 of the 7 counties represented on a governance board and 2 cities, Sonora and Angels Camp. And so we've already done a lot of the hard work of establishing a table of interested parties. But when we heard that Sierra Business Council was going to apply as well, I met with Steve and we talked it over, and it just made sense, since you do this for a living and you do a good job of it, that we would let you drive and sort of we'll be in the passenger seat wherever it makes sense. But the point is, Steve's been looking at using this money to help create some capacity building in economic development and workforce development in our area. And so a lot of the money, he'll be leveraging the existing governance we have. We already have these 5 of the 7 counties represented, which is about 85% of the total population. Supervisor Brannon was identifying that. I noticed you like distribution based on population within phase 1, but for phase 2, you'd prefer not to allocate by population because LA would take all the money that way. And we're also in the midst, the Central Sierra Economic Development District is in the midst of updating our comprehensive economic development strategy. And as Mr. Frisch said, we're leveraging those 2 projects as one. And so this project, these Truckee people are coming down here and they're not taking over, they're actually working with us and leveraging existing projects that we have going. So it's a great partnership. Look forward to working with them. Thanks.
Any other public comment? Any on Zoom? Yep, we do have one on Zoom. Or 2.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, you're on with the board.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand the need for restructuring our government, our state government, in order to achieve economic prosperity, which is what the plan is proposing to do. I understand that there's always room for improvement in economic development, but I don't understand how we're going to, how we need to restructure the whole state government to do that. And we all due respect, having a Soviet model of 21 councils with 5 committees each who get to decide what happens, and placing a lot of weight in the stakeholders for what needs to happen instead of the voters. This is nothing that is being presented for the people to vote on. It's something that is just being implemented through the Board of Supervisors and the city councils. The biomass utilization is as part of economic opportunity that is being devised for that, and that's why the government needs to be restructured. Is something that one of the reasons why they want to implement these. My question is, what is wrong with the private sector doing what is always done? Supervisor Brandon said that there's already a biomass position available. How are we to support inclusive and low carbon economic development? How is that going to happen when we're supposed to achieve 100% no carbon emission goals? And I noticed that there is a coincidence or resemblance between this whole thing, the American Rescue Plan, and there is also something called the UN COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund and a UN SURF. I just wanted to find out whether that's a coincidence or just happened to be that way, or is there a relationship? And I also want to know, what does equity have to do with the jobs in our area? Are you aiming for equality of outcome or equality of opportunity? Because if you take the red tape away and the government away, I think there is equal opportunities for everyone to succeed. I also, the program, wanted to find out, the program is interested in increasing wages, but the problem is deeper than that. It has to do with Federal Reserve printing money out of nothing and resulting in an inflationary trend, which is what we're going through. And the housing burden issue you mentioned is caused by the government out of control spending and the Federal Reserve printing money like crazy and increasing the wages. I don't see how that's going to solve the problem. And why are you in the business of increasing the wages in our counties and changing and restructuring the whole way of our constitutional government? I have only lived in this country for 25 years, but I can tell you since I have lived here, I have heard about global warming, and we were supposed
Hello,
to get the
ma'am.
water a long
I'm sorry,
time ago.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Yes, thank you, Maria. The 3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have one more on Zoom.
Hi, good afternoon. John Buckley with CSERC. There's been some very
Hey, John, we lost you. Stand by a minute. We're going to try and get you back on.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. You guys got him?
Okay.
Okay, John, it sounds like we got you.
Okay, so good afternoon. There's been a lot of good information shared. And again, it looks like a lot of opportunities. One of the things that Supervisor Brandon was being concerned about is whether it's for population, whatever concern is, that each individual county will want to be promoting for its interests. And what I believe Steve Frisch put forward is this is an effort for the region to have a HRTC council that works toward consensus to be looking for opportunities to fund areas that will build job growth and high wage employment, and then create projects and different approaches that will achieve that. So it's not like that 30 million or 40 million is going to go to a local biomass facility just because one county wants even more biomass than it may already have. This is a new opportunity to collaboratively work with others in like-minded areas to try and find opportunities to build workforce. And Steve didn't even touch on many of the positive, proactive things the Sierra Business Council is already doing with YSS and Master Stewardship Agreement and others to try and build the workforce with Dave and Motherload Job Training and others, so that there are more forestry and wildfire resilience jobs that are created at high wages in the local area. The one thing I think may have been missed because of questions that have been raised is the state already has over $1 billion been applied to wildfire resiliency and forest health. So Anaya brought it up, Jaron brought it up, others brought it up. This plan isn't specifically to be applying for forest health or wildfire resiliency. It's to create jobs and economic prosperity in potential high growth sectors, which include contractors working on forest health and fire mitigation or energy innovation or sustainable tourism or whatever. So there are different blocks of funding that are out there. And for those that don't want grants, the fact that we pay taxes, they go to the state, and then the state has different agencies such as CAL FIRE or Sierra Nevada Conservancy that have already applied more than $20 million back just to YSS alone to apply to national forest projects here that benefit us locally. It's not like there's some pot that somehow is from an evil source. It's tax dollars going in and then being reallocated to purposes that the state and local governments see are essential. So my hope is that we can work in a collaborative spirit toward this and really look for ways to build those high wage jobs, which is what the economic objectives are, and that we can partner with the Sierra Business Council to find ways to do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Okay, I don't see any other for public comment. Oh, there is one more on Zoom.
Hello, this is Ty Robin. Just following this, I think I just heard John Buckley admit that world governments, it was part of his last thing he said. And there is a concern, it's a legitimate concern. Where's the money coming from? I know it's coming, it was taken from us. That's what the other lady was talking about through our taxes and then being redistributed. So it's a distribution of wealth, you know. Under the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab is quoted as saying, "You will own nothing and be happy." And you know, I've read the paper, and there's a lot of talk about this being a conspiracy theory, but it's not. We need to follow the money, and you know, it sounds great, to be honest with you. Job creation, high-paying jobs, um, you know, making the environment better and safer for forest fires and all that. And I'm not against that at all. I just want to make sure the funding is transparent and that there are no connections to United Nations Agenda 2030 or the World Economic Forum. The money's not coming from somebody like George Soros or something like that, you know? That's really, I think, what the other people are trying to say too. It's not a conspiracy theory. We just want to make sure that these things make sense, like the Climate Action Plan. And I've read Anaya Kirk's blog, and the numbers don't add up, right? So how can we be expected to lower our carbon footprint based on junk science, right? The numbers just don't even add up, and we're not going to give up our fireplaces and our cars and our recreation, snowmobiles. We're not going to shut down Dodge Ridge Ski Resort or the other industries to comply with this. And this county does need to be ground zero and stand up for that kind of a resistance. And I hope I'm making sense. You know, if the project is legit, perhaps it's a great thing. Again, who's going to argue about creating jobs and helping the environment? We just want to make sure that there's not a hidden agenda. And whenever you get these grant monies, a lot of times there's strings attached. And the other lady who brought up that, yeah, we're being taxed and then the money's being redistributed. Why should we continue that, and why not resist so we have lower taxes, right? So that's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to close public comment. I'm going to bring it back to the city and to the county for closing comments before we end the special meeting. And I had Supervisor Campbell give me the eye, so I'm going to let him go first. Nice eye.
Thank you, Chair Kirk, and also really thank you, Steve. I appreciate the presentation and good information, and it's an interesting concept that's, I think, pretty new to our community and to the region. And you know, some of the thing, I think it was Council Member Cruz that had talked about the grants process, and I have experience writing, you know, grants and seeing the process of how the strings kind of, where you typically, the way the process works is that you write the grant to meet the needs of the grant rather than the needs of the community. And so it's not, but then if you don't do that, you're losing out on money that could potentially be coming into your county to address at least some need. So I'm always a little skeptical of any project, any plan that looks at how, particularly local governments, county, city, but even like the states or federal government for that matter, ability to move the needle in terms of economic process. Because if you don't have the investment for private industry, it's not going to work. And so what I really appreciate from what you've presented here is that it does address that. We're looking specifically at the areas where I think almost all of us observe that there are huge opportunities, particularly with natural resources management and the different products that can be produced there and the millions of dollars that could be generated in jobs and industry in our county. And so I think more than anything, what we're doing is talking about how to best seize an opportunity that we recognize. And so giving that example of writing a grant to meet the needs of the grant rather than the needs of the community, I think this, to me, it checks a lot of my boxes in terms of what the needs of our community is economically. So I think it's a good starting place, and I agree. Mr. Taney threw Supervisor Brandon under the bus, but I actually agree. I'm inclined to agree that we should focus on population when we're talking regional, and maybe downplay that a little bit when we're looking at larger cities that could probably, where $40 million for Los Angeles County would be a drop in the bucket, but for us, it would be pretty significant. So thank you very much for being here, Mr. Fish.
Steve, I just want to thank you for your time. And Dave, I totally understand where you're coming from. I understand the grant thing. But just to make a final statement, it is bothersome that so many corporations are leaving California. No good corporation wants to stay in California with a high corporate tax. California needs to stop strangling business and overtaxing and overregulating not only its citizens, but its businesses as well. They need to open the gates of the free market, and that is how you get business here. Government grants, they do come with strings, and it's unfortunate that our cities and counties are left to ask for our money back. And again, we have strings attached to that, but I do appreciate the work that you are doing, Supervisor Campbell, by doing that, but it is the corner that our state has put us in. You can't force innovation by law or royal decree. So my vote is to get the free market going and stop begging for our money back. And it's just a statement, that's all. Anyone else like to make a statement? I'll pass the microphone on.
Okay. Just a comment. You know, I was on one of the Zoom calls when you were putting this together, and I was aghast at the HRTC Council and the 3 from each county or cities within the counties. And you clarified today that that doesn't necessarily mean city council and or the county Board of Supervisors. I'm glad to hear that because we're looking in Tuolumne County, we're looking ways to reduce and pare down the number of committees and commissions we're on. We're overloaded. So I think this will be incumbent upon us, this plan will be to find a good, 3 good representatives from the city and the county. And I'm not saying the city council shouldn't be part of it. If you have capacity, that's great. I'm not so sure the county does have that capacity unless we do something else to make room. But I'm hoping that we find 3 really well-qualified community folks to be part of this if we decide to move forward.
So I have a mic, thank you. And I'm just gonna rehash for just a second. Thank you for coming. This is wonderful in its way, but I'm a little vague on the grant aspect of it. And so to clarify, if I understand, we get to choose projects and things that we feel will enrich our counties, cities, and region. And we decide that. But then if I'm understanding correctly, we still have to go hand in hand and try and tick all the climate, diversity, etc. boxes and ask the state for the money or some granting entity for the money once we have a project. Is that correct? Or is that not set in stone yet?
So we do not know what the criteria for funding will be until the grant guidelines come out.
Okay.
But I think what I would anticipate if I were you is that there would still be a grant application process, but participation in the SURF process and elevation of that project as a SURF priority would give it a significantly higher likelihood of being funded.
Okay.
Right? So my understanding is that that $500 million is secured for SURF recommended projects, right?
Okay.
So you're not competing against non-SURF projects. It would likely be the pool of the projects that come from those 13 regions.
Okay.
And I wish I could answer your question more fully, but we don't know until the guidelines.
I understand that, and I think we all understand that we are still early in the process, and actually that's good for these questions to come up because we can potentially lobby people and exert a little tiny bit of influence on how that ends up. But my second question was, I mentioned how excited I am about some of the opportunities for forest management, especially brush and biomass, which I think should be a big growth industry, both for fire safety and just to get our forests back into a condition where they're healthy. They're not healthy right now. Anything that is intended to work should be able to find funding on its own. Is there the possibility of taking some of these funds and using them for loan guarantees where we would leverage the same pot far further for actual viable, good business models to get more bang for our buck?
Excellent question. I'm a big fan of loan guarantees as a strategy for increasing leverage for private sector investment, right? I think two things would need to happen in this program for that to occur. Number one, it would have to be a recommendation from the HRTC that is adopted. Number two, it would have to fit the guidelines of the state funding pot. However, I might point out that there might be other sources of funding available for loan guarantee programs. For example, the RCAC, or the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, USDA micro-lending funds, California Climate Catalyst Fund is considering loan guarantees at iBank. So this is something I think that should be explored as part of that process. And to the extent that this funding could be used to leverage private investment, that would be the best case scenario, actually. I mean, that should have been one of the first things I said, and I didn't, right?
So, yeah, well, we want good jobs that can support our community and where working class people can afford to buy homes locally, which would be really nice. And that's where I believe that to some degree this answers Councilwoman Cruz's question, where are we creating real value and greater productivity? And that's, I think that would answer it in some ways, but especially if we can tie that in with other funding sources, because it looks like we're going to have a true market for biomass locally. That's great. But for somebody to break into it brand new and have good equipment, you're looking at a rock bottom price of $5 million. And while the people I work with and talk with and think would be great candidates for this, they are very good at working in the woods and getting wood out of it. Most of them don't have the sophistication to go get that type of loan without having been in the business for some time. So, thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, Stevia, thank you for the presentation. And I know we've been in communication in the past too, and I really appreciate that because this is new. It's kind of bringing back the economic redevelopment agencies in a way. I mean, we're thinking, how do we work with our partners? What projects are going to meet our goals? And how do we leverage state funding? I'm right with, I think, Mayor Plummer. At the end of the day, I see with this program, and this is an opportunity for us to, I think, leverage some of the goals that we have for the community and to make it to where people can find a prosperity and a good life here. I look at this as potentially preparing for the next 10 years of projects and also partnership with the city and how we can be able to, I think, help each other in our needs as municipalities to ensure, I think, aggressive growth, at least is what I'd like to see. A lot more housing, a lot more rentals, and a lot more economic development amongst the constraints that just rural areas are facing. For me in that, it's how can we use this to maximize leveraging all the rest of the funding? Because again, 40 million is not going to get split many ways. I think the most usable way we could do it is to have really shovel-ready projects. There's plenty of money out there right now. We just can't access it. We're not set up to be able to get that money, whether it's a recreation program or it's a healthcare assessment or it's trying to access fee reduction funding. And we're working at that, but I see an opportunity with this. I think if we can focus on, in my opinion, infrastructure, housing, and education, and particular infrastructure, that provides the longevity to leverage private investments over time. We end up somewhat controlling the environment of these decisions, and I want us to be able to live in that sphere where we have limited funds to just make it easier to start this and make it to where people can. Other than that, I really look forward to, I think this moving forward is going to be a great opportunity. So please keep in touch. And I've got like 15 things written down here. There are so many good ideas that I could see connect with state funding. I really want to get the expert opinion of the Sierra Business Council and the Economic Development District on, even if we don't have those numbers yet, we don't have clear direction from the state. I'm a betting man. Where do you think it's going? How can we make sure that our projects fit that as best as we can? And we're set up to make sure we actually pull some of this money down. Because the worst outcome, and it's not here to make any pitch or ideology, is we pay our taxes and it goes to LA, right? That is the absolute worst outcome. We want it to come back here for things that we would like, so.
So, Steve, I got a question. If you're looking at loan guarantees and leveraging, and I'm sorry, I'm not able to turn to you real easy here, but wouldn't the ability to do that would be based on reserving X amount of funds, right, to guarantee, right? So if you're doing that, then you're saying those funds aren't going to be available elsewhere. Otherwise, how could you make that guarantee? So I'm kind of, you know, depending on how long the funding is around for and the sourcing of it could drive some of that. But I'm just got concerns about loan guarantees because it's taken the money away from areas that could be used elsewhere.
So the decisions on what investments to explore and recommend will go through the HRTC, okay? I think what I was trying to get to in response to the previous question is that looking at a loan guarantee program doesn't necessarily mean you would need to use this source of capital to guarantee those loans. That is the SURF funding in the phase 2 funding, but you might be able to put together a loan guarantee program that is funded from other sources as part of this process, right? And this idea of creating essentially more certainty for private investment in the local markets actually makes a lot of sense because there is a ton of private investment money out there that is looking for places to invest across a wide range of sectors. Like we run into people all the time who are asking us the question, where can I invest in housing? And then you start getting into, for example, all of the sideboards around that, and our local, our region begins to fall out, right? So looking at how we could create, like studying within this process, how we could create a loan guarantee program and then go out and find the source of capital to secure those, or to be security for those guarantees, might be the type of thing we could look at. I agree with you theoretically that using the funding, like this is money that could be, like theoretically, if there's a grant program that comes from this $500 million, it can be invested immediately, right? You almost never have money like that can be immediately invested. You want to use that money for something that you can put on the ground as quickly as possible, right? But you could study this alternative funding mechanism as part of that process and stand that up. That's capacity. That's financial capacity within the region, right? This would be a really good project, for example, for the Central Sierra Economic Development District to be thinking about, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate your explanation. You know, it's not that I'm against the leveraging, you know, it's just, you gotta have a pot of money someplace to back that up, so.
I would note that for that type of thing, I mean, obviously, this is a much deeper discussion, and it will be held, if at all, at the level, or the regional level, and I forget all the names for all the acronyms, but you do need to remember that one of the reasons that it's attractive is because if you just give a grant to something that is otherwise unviable, you don't know that that's going to produce more wealth. Whereas if you give it to a business that can compete for that loan, one, some of them are going to fail, but eventually, effectively, you become a mini venture capitalist in that sense in a local region, and using other funds or giving maybe even just a partial guarantee would bring in security and make it more attractive for them. But the other thing is that every year that business survives, you have a diminishing commitment, and it frees up. So 3 years later, instead of 10 million that went to loan guarantees, if they haven't failed, and you're evaluating them as businesses, not grants that are just a gift. So then you have probably a third of that 10 million freed up already to do other things with. It's not tied up for forever. And if they're unsuccessful, then that's part of the learning process, obviously, where they shouldn't be funded.
I think this is a
Anyway.
good foreshadowing of the richness of the discussion that is going to go on at the HRTC level, which is a good thing.
And I'm looking at the timeline. I know we're scheduled till 5, and I think you kind of nailed it on the head as far as we don't even know what the state parameters are, and what we need to do is try and be a part of that conversation beforehand. That way, the loan idea, that way all these ideas. My concern is that this is done in a bubble, and we're not part of that process. So what we need to do is get with CSRC, RCRC, find out who the players are, and influence that conversation as much as possible from the get-go. Because like what I'm hearing from Cruz and other people is typical with when it comes to grants. Like we're talking about creating high-wage jobs for a very small sector, maybe a few hundred, maybe a few thousand. What about the hundreds of thousands of people who are affected right now because we're trying to get away from fossil fuels and we're drowning in the economy and in inflation? It's like, if that's one of the issues I deal with is like, so anyways, again, but then I have to put myself back in the bubble. What is the parameters of this, what we're dealing with? How do we influence it to benefit us the most and be effective within our region? One thing that when I look at the region, at least we're all pretty much rural counties. I think we're all going to be dealing with the same issues for the most part. We're not lumped in there with, even Modesto or the Bay Area or LA. So I think we have a good chance to hopefully be a part of that conversation. So what I would look to you for in the future is communicate with us how those people that we could speak with to have those conversations. That way we're not at the tail end of this, but more at the front end. So those are my comments. Steve, thank you very much for this presentation, and to the city for you guys coming out and being a part of this conversation, and the public, if there's any public left, because it's almost dinner time. So with that being said, I'm going to, unless there's anybody's dying to say anything else.
I just want to say thank you as well for inviting us in. This was a very valuable conversation. We'll be taking the feedback back and incorporating it into the process, and we really look forward to working with you in the future, should we receive the grant.
All right, great. Well, it is 5:01. I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.